Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. This is so special to be here and share a little bit of what I've been working with and through and developing over the past 2 years. I am an artist. I identify as a research-based artist. I like to explore the world and connect in multiple ways of knowing and build community as I do that. This project that I'll be sharing today is called Swamp Therapy, and it's hosted in the Everglades. It's a way to connect to the Everglades, which is the ecosystem, the unique ecosystem of South Florida. There's nothing like it in the world. And South Florida is going to be kind of ground zero for rising sea levels and climate change. So this is an ecosystem that is very much likely to become extinct unless we make very serious changes in our world. So it's an excellent space to explore. And that's why I chose it. It's also in my backyard. And I find that often when people are trying to connect to the land or interested in climate resilience work, they go toward urban farming or agriculture. And this is an opportunity to connect with wilderness. So the Gaia goals that my project is going to be addressing are research and education, and as well as arts and culture. And you'll see that this research and education then develops into an art project. And that's what I will be asking support with and perhaps funding for anyone who's interested out there. I will mention that this is one of many projects that I do. I think if people take some time to read the bio, they'll read that I have a lot of different projects. I'm a very creative person. So I do these swamp therapy series, I do community rituals, I do arts reviews for the Miami ecosystem. I have a podcast called African Nomads Digital Library. I have my own artistic practice of performance rituals in nature, and I'm currently working on scientifically proven water offerings. And then after I present this piece on swamp therapy, I want to talk about how this kind of introduction into an ecosystem and healing our connection to the land is actually the perfect platform to encourage new change makers like myself and like the people who are around me who go with me to these hikes to start dreaming up other kinds of projects that can support the community. So I'm excited to dive in. And without further ado, I'll start looking through the slides. Swamp therapy came to me pretty much at the beginning of 2020. I don't know if you all remember, but there was this incredible image of the wildfires in Australia that opened 2020, and the sky in Australia was red, and the earth was black, and there was this kind of sun in the distance, and it looked just like the Australian flag. And there was this sense that the indigenous people of Australia had warned of this kind of tipping point. And that's what we were witnessing in the wildfires of Australia. This impacted me so much that I felt like I needed to go immediately to connect with nature and hear her. And within a week of those news, I started swamp therapy. And it became this exploration, this collective learning experience. And you can see here some of my Instagram posts. It really just began on Instagram. I made a flyer. I set some intentions. I had already been in dialogue with activists here in Miami, like Houston Cypress, who's an indigenous Miccosukee activist who founded Love the Everglades movement, also the Sierra Club. I'm a big part of the art community, so I've also been in partnership with the artists in residence in the Everglades, that Everglades National Park does. So I was already involved enough to catalyze this project into a full existence. And the premise was that the earth was alive and that I wanted to connect with her, that these weren't going to be regular hikes, but they were going to be opportunities for meditation, for art therapy, and for sharing different activist practices as we bring different minds together to think of solutions and ways to restore this ecosystem, to protect this ecosystem. A really key theory that I found in my research is the sense of place theory. If people don't have a sense of place or belonging to where they are, they don't really care about the place. And I think that that's a very big part of why I wanted to explore the Everglades is I had grown up in Miami. Um, and I had only been to the Everglades maybe once when I was in elementary school, like for a school field trip. The Everglades aren't actually an integrated part of the life in Miami. Miami is a very urban, um, glamorous city. And people going out into the wilderness is not very common. And I found that by exploring the edges of the urban landscape and really connecting with the wilderness that's here, like this city is built on a swamp, and the swamp is the Everglades. So to really remember what this place is without humans constantly changing it and transforming it, it's really, really powerful. So this idea of developing an emotional attachment by going to see the Everglades, by meditating with it, by working on this premise that this ecosystem is alive and it has so much to teach us, and understand its relationship to the rest of the city, is a crucial part of the educational component of swamp therapy, especially as it relates to the water. So the Everglades ecosystem is shaped by Lake Okeechobee, which is a lake that's in the center of Florida. And the water flows down from Lake Okeechobee to the ocean. And that water flow is what creates the Everglades ecosystem. And underneath there's an aquifer. And the aquifer is where Miamians get their clean drinking water. It's some of the best drinking water in the world. So we are very much interconnected with this ecosystem. So part of wanting to go into the Everglades was to have an experience that was more than just hikes. I had been with people who had taken me into the Everglades, and it's definitely the kind of environment that you need someone to extend a hand for you to explore. And I wanted to offer that to my community as well. But I wanted to make it much more intentional. And that intention really shifted who showed up for the hikes and the kind of conversations that we had. So there were three key frameworks for me. One was decolonization, and this was spreading the awareness of Indigenous history and land stewardship by the Miccosukee and Seminole tribes here in Florida, as well as tracing the immigrant histories of people in Miami. Miami is a city full of immigrants, many of them from Latin America, and part of going on these hikes was having a conversation about our relationship to the land, our relationship to being connected to nature, and where our families come from, and what the separation from those original environments has created within us in the alienation that we feel. Another framework was ecofeminism. And this for me was really important because the violence that we have as a broader society in prioritizing human infrastructure needs over respecting the natural world is devastating. There's no big, the Everglades is an excellent case of that. There's canals that have diverted all of the water flow in the Everglades, and it has greatly impacted and changed the ecosystem. So relating to the land from a much more feminine and intuitive relationship, that instead of wanting to know and analyze everything about the ecosystem, we're instead listening and receiving and intuiting ways of knowing. That was a key part of this practice. Like, we weren't trying to extract anything from this ecosystem, we were communing with it and trying to become whole by connecting with it. And then the other framework was art therapy, and art therapy is also more like a methodology. It's again exploring this different way of knowing, where we are using multiple modes of expression, whether that be dance, whether that be making music together, whether that be making earth offerings, where we'd bring various biodegradable things to kind of bury in the soil. These practices are a way to open a different way of relating, that it isn't just talking in nature, but being and touching and feeling and drawing and intuiting and maybe tapping into the subconscious or the dream states, and into that like subtle aesthetic or subtle mysticism that being fully immersed in nature can provoke. So we're really opening those channels through various meditation practices. And of course, it's so therapeutic to be around green things, around water, around animals. So that was actually very enjoyable. to be on these hikes. As heady and intentional as they were, there was this very like fulfilling component, nurturing component to them. And this intentionality that I shared, I made it into a big kind of social media education program, and it attracted a lot of really great stakeholders who have different relationships to the Everglades. So on one of the first hikes, I had a landscape architect, a real estate contractor, a community builder, and an urban farmer, and me. And we were all having conversations about our relationship to the ecosystem. And the conversations that we were having there and the way that we were reading together were impacting our projects as we were forming them later on. This communing together in the Everglades became a kind of community activism or an incubator or a catalyst for something more. Same thing on another hike. I had a web developer, nonprofit administrator, a graphic designer, a climate superhero, a homeschooling family, and a journalist, all kind of being in dialogue with each other about how they want to relate to this ecosystem and how they want to heal their relationship to nature, because that's really the first door, right? Like once you build a sense of place, once you heal your connection to nature, then so much more opens up about wanting to care for community, wanting to change your lifestyle. Another amazing part of this project that I didn't fully recognize while I was in it, but when I got kind of media attention, it was very much highlighted as a unique portion of this project, is that the people that I was attracting were diverse. And you can read in the quote here that diversity wasn't something that was like intentional or planned. It was just people who are organically part of my circle. I myself am Cuban American, I identify as Afro-Indigenous, and I have naturally around me a diverse group of people. And I was taking these people with me to the Everglades, to these national parks. And we were noticing that the people around us were majority white, majority older folks, and that we were a very different demographic engaging with the landscape. So you can see that there's some data that this incredible journalist, Maria Esquinca, wrote, that the US Census data reports that 95% of national park visitors are white, 1% or less are Black, and 60% are Hispanic. So you can see that there's a lot of disparity in who gets to connect with nature. And I'm so grateful that she highlighted that topic, because then it became inspiration for me to create a zine later on. So this is a kind of a 2-year action plan and timeline. We're pretty much like halfway through this timeline. And I've already mentioned that I started it in January of 2020 with the group hikes and the social media education. Then the pandemic began, and I really started to do more solo immersions and readings into the history of activism in the Everglades, and what were some of the civic engagement and political advocacy that gave rise to the creation of the national parks and the national preserves, and some of the various activist organizations in the region who buy up land to protect it from people who try to cross the urban rural boundary to create more real estate or to build new roads. Like the Everglades is constantly under threat. So I was really educating myself on that. And while I was in that process, I was encouraged to apply to a fellowship for Catalyst Miami, and I received it. It was a clear program on climate resiliency and leadership. And that fellowship supported me in developing a zine for diverse youth. So just like I had never really explored the Everglades until like after college, really, I wanted to create a zine for young people, either in high school or early college, to introduce them to the idea of going out into nature with intention. And this zine had like meditation practices on connecting to their own ancestry, understanding their roots, understanding the histories of their families while they're walking in this land. And this was part of introducing these kind of decolonial frameworks of land acknowledgements, of understanding some of the more exploitative aspects of being on this land, and understanding some of the negotiations that have been made in order to create urban spaces on this ecosystem. I made that zine, and I'm still working on like the graphics for it. But in January of 2021, I started to connect with other activists who've been working on the Everglades through a prayer walk that Seminole elder Betty Osceola led. And we started to dream together a possibility of creating a camping retreat, like a swamp therapy camping retreat for artists and activists to really connect us all together to dream up new ways or new conversations about the future of the Everglades. There's still so many questions about how this ecosystem is going to survive climate change, or if it will at all, and what are our duties and responsibilities in protecting the plants and animals in this ecosystem from real estate developers who have very cynical perspectives. You know, if like, oh, if it's going to drown, we might as well just make as much money as we can. No, I am of the stance, and I think many people in the environmentalist community are of the stance, that the plants and the animals have a right to exist, have a right to their own world. And so that's part of the dialogues that we're trying to create together. And we're hoping that this kind of camping retreat that we're planning for July, with various artists and activists who are engaging with the Everglades here in Miami, is going to produce a book or an exhibition. And we hope to share that in November of this year. I'm particularly partnering up with Climate Crusader, who is like he has his art project of his own, and he's a climate superhero in South Florida. And so we're kind of teaming up, and I'll point him out later on. We're applying for a grant together to make this happen. So as I mentioned, the Everglades really is under a lot of various threats. Like, I could make various slides of the kind of threats that the ecosystem is under, but I wanted to highlight 3 of them, because these 3 are continually issues that come up in the civic engagement of our city and the way in which we want to vote for policies in the city. And I think that's a big part of going to the Everglades, having these dialogues, having these conscious connections, spiritual connections with the ecosystem, and then bringing it back to the way that we vote or the way that we advocate for community change. So some of those issues are the extension of the urban development boundary. There's an entire movement called Hold the Line, and we make sure that the people who go to the swamp therapy walks with me sign up to receive any updates about potential proposals for building highways through the Everglades or oil drilling in the Everglades. Like, these are constant threats to this ecosystem. Another one, like I mentioned, is the extinction of the ecosystem itself because of flooding and saltwater intrusion. So because South Florida has a limestone base, which is our aquifer, it's very porous. And there will come a point where the water will rise up enough that it doesn't actually need to swallow the Everglades whole in order for it to like pollute the drinking water. Like, the aquifer itself will become too salinated for it to be our drinking water. So raising awareness about this whole process is a key part, and how that will affect the plants and animals who are part of this ecosystem and who only exist in this ecosystem. And then another piece of the puzzle is water pollution and disrupted flows. So there's a whole system of canals that were made to support the early agriculture of South Florida, and that would continue, especially up in Lake Okeechobee. There's a lot of sugar plantations, or contemporary farming, that still burn sugarcane, still pollute Lake Okeechobee, and that pollution makes its way down through the river of grass, and finds itself in very high concentrations around some of the indigenous territory, like the Miccosukee Reservation. And the Miccosukee themselves have been doing a lot of water testing to show that there's a concentration of these pollutants in their territory. So I try to amplify those conversations, because those are very important conversations that the city council needs to have, our local environmental conservation efforts need to be having. And especially when engaging with young people, you never know where they're going to kind of position themselves later on. So having these conversations is really important. I know I didn't have them. Like, I did not have an education on our local ecosystem while I was in school in Miami. I went to the Everglades, and maybe I knew like our national bird, but that was it. So this is filling in a really important gap. And this education component for me, and I think was part of the big success of swamp therapy and why it got so much notoriety, why so many people reach out to me about wanting to go on these swamp therapy hikes, is the voice that I developed on social media as I shared it. It was very fun, and there was a lot of different components that I mixed in. There was, of course, a lot of my personal spiritual practices, like me trying to bridge my African roots and indigenous Taino roots with the way in which I want to relate to this land here in the Everglades, wanting to acknowledge the traditions of the people of North America of offering tobacco to the land, or burning sweetgrass in honor of Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, which has been so influential and a big kind of platform for people to understand traditional ecological knowledge and ways of making decision about caretaking for ecosystems in a way that's much more holistic, and thinking about all of the species and plants and animals and the cycles that they're in, as opposed to just prioritizing human needs and desires. So the first one that you're seeing here is my solo hike, and I do some kind of mud walks. I dance in nature. I do some microscope photography. The second hike, just to give you a sample, the second hike was full of plant experts. I attracted plant experts, so they were teaching me, and that was really lovely to have that kind of collective learning experience. I definitely wanted to avoid being like the tour guide who knows everything, because it's really about us discovering together and listening together. That was really the space I wanted to hold. And we had some really beautiful conversations, including this quote by Quinn, who's an urban farmer here in South Florida, that feeling of separateness from that connection is what makes us exploit things. And I thought that was a really profound moment in which we felt the connection to the ecosystem, especially looking over a wide expanse of sawgrass, and feeling really connected in that moment, witnessing the beauty and the way in which this ecosystem is so interconnected. If you ever get the chance to go to the Everglades, go. It's one of the most elegant ecosystems. We actually joked that it's almost like the birds and the flowers all decided to like match, almost like a fashion season. Like, we're all going to have this particular curvature and these are going to be our color schemes. It's that level of like co-evolution that creates the aesthetic of the Everglades, and it's truly breathtaking and awe-inspiring. So then another group hike that we did, I started to attract more of a diverse age crowd, including a lovely child who is homeschooled and has an incredible imagination and became kind of a big character during the hike. In this hike in particular, we actually got the chance to meditate with the water, and we all had quiet time with the water around a part of the ecosystem that's created by alligators. So alligators are known as the architects of the swamp. And when they're doing their mating holes, they create these spaces where the water drops in, then all these fishes and birds gather. So we went to one of those and meditated with the water, and then wrote poems or made songs. It was really a beautiful, beautiful moment. So yeah, this is a taste of some of the hikes that we did. After the pandemic changed a lot of things. So I wasn't able to continue doing the hikes with large groups of people or publicly. I started to do them on my own. And then I started to work on that zine, which is coming soon, and I'm very serious about publishing it. And then once the pandemic, I don't know, it won't ever be over, but once more people are vaccinated and feel comfortable gathering again, we can have that camping trip, and then we can have that exhibition, and perhaps that book publication of the conversations, the art that we're making together as we're thinking about the future of the Everglades in 2021, looking to what the future of Miami is going to look like, and what is our investment in protecting this ecosystem, and how does connecting to the wilderness in our own backyard actually open us up to transforming ourselves and making different choices in how we want to live in the city.